Today I want to share some thoughts with you on the subject of the dominoes that changed everything. I know that's kind of a strange title, but you'll see where I'm going in a few minutes. The decisions you make daily impact more people in your life than you might think. There's a story. It says there lived a lonely old man in one village, and in the evenings the local boys used to come to play close to his house, and the games were accompanied with loud cries. See, the old man was done with it. So one evening he invited the boys over to his house, and he told them how much he likes listening to loud children's voices and promised to give each of them $1 if they promised to come back again tomorrow. Well, the boys came and played even more cheerfully and loudly. The old man paid them and promised to pay them again the next time. But the next evening, instead of $1, the boys got 50 cents. On the third evening, the old man paid them only 10 cents and explained that he's running out of money. "Dear children," he asked, "would you agree to come and play tomorrow just to play for free?" Extremely disappointed, the boys said that they won't come anymore. It is worth losing so much energy for free. The point being that the man, he decided to use a little tact and a little creativity to get the boys to stay away. In Proverbs 3 in the Old Testament, it says that we're supposed to trust in the Lord with all our heart and don't lean on our own understanding. And it says, if you in all your ways acknowledge him and he'll make your paths straight. The Message paraphrase of the same text says, trust God from the bottom of your heart and don't try to figure out everything on your own. That's pretty hard to do sometimes, not to tell you. I'm the first to admit that sometimes it's not easy to figure stuff out or to let the Almighty help you in certain areas in your life. Your worst mistakes have been impacted by a few bad decisions. Have you ever looked back at your life and you look back in the rearview mirror and said, you know what? I wish I should have done things differently, because if I would have done things differently, then my life would have turned out so much better. Cheryl Rogers shares, it was a crisp fall day, and Mumsy, the mama squirrel, and her baby Peepsy scattered down the grand oak tree where they made their home. Peepsy was getting older, and it was time for him to help hunt for food. "I want to teach you how to find the best acorns," Mumsy said. "You go ahead and find 6. Peepsy quickly grabbed 6 acorns and scattered them on the ground near the old oak in the forest. And "Here, Ma," he screamed as he dropped the acorns one by one at her feet. "Well, let's see," said Mumsy, reaching slowly to the ground for the first acorn. It looked perfect on Peepsy on the outside, but when she turned it over, it was only half a shell. "Look," she told her young one, "it's empty inside. There's no meat here." She grabbed a second one. It was a bit weathered, but it was in one piece. She cracked it with her teeth and spat it on the ground. "Yuck," she said, "this one is rotten on the inside. Even though it looks okay on the outside, it is rotten all the way through." She smiled at Peepsy. "That's okay, though. We've got plenty more." She took the third acorn from the small pile at her feet. It was cracked, and bugs already had made meal off most of the meat. "This one is picked over," she told her baby gently. "There's not much left." The fourth one looked the most promising. It was fresh looking. She snatched it eagerly, only to throw it disappointingly to the ground. Another animal had eaten it already, cracked it, and taken the meat. The fifth shell was also fresh looking. She cracked it with her teeth and inspected it and offered it to the baby. "This one looks good," she said, holding the acorn for Peepsy to examine. Then both she and Peepsy had a small bite. "Yummy," the little one said. Optimistic, Mumsy grabbed the last acorn, dropped the last acorn at her feet. But again, the top half of the shell looked perfect, but when she turned it over, guess what? The meat was gone. "You see, Peepsy," she said, "things are not always as they seem to be." I think you and I have to look at life that way sometimes. Because sometimes on the outside, people seem to be a certain way. But when you take the time and invest the time and look really beyond what it seems to be, you kind of really see what's the inside. And sometimes it's not always pretty what's on the inside. In the book of Ephesians in the New Testament of the Bible, there was a man who wrote a good chunk of the New Testament by the name of Paul. And Paul, at one time, was a hunter of Christians. He helped assassinate Christians in that new faith about 2,000 years ago. But after he got his life turned around, in the book of Ephesians, it says this. Actually, a paraphrase of it says, "Therefore be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ also loved you and gave himself for you, an offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. But immorality or any impurity or greed must not even be named among you, as it is proper among the saints. And there must be no filthiness and no silly talk." And he lists several other things that we need to be more careful of these days, because if you proclaim to be a Christian, you're supposed to act in a certain way and behave in a certain way. And I'll be the first to tell you, sometimes it's not that easy to do exactly that. The Phillips translation of this text, at least a piece of it, it says to live your lives in love, the same sort of love which Christ gives us, which he perfectly expressed himself to the world. I think you and I, if we have the right motivation and the right intention, that we need to focus more on what we can control in our lives versus what we cannot control. Paul is asking them to live in a completely different mindset, in a completely different way of thinking, in a culture that was counter to what they were really trained to live in over the time. Paul says, he says, really, let me just give you a baby step. He says, he says, if you look at every opportunity and use this as a criteria or a foundation, he says, therefore be careful how you walk, not as unwise people, but as wise people. How many times haven't you and I made decisions that were so foolish because we didn't think things through properly enough to make wise decisions that would, in time, we look back and realize, man, we should have thought this thing through a little more clearly. Don't be careless how you live your life, because every action you take, every action other people take impacts other people in your life. And I've learned that over the years, that even the smallest little move I make in my life impacts other people. The smallest little move you make impacts other people also. Paul goes on to say, making the most of your time because the days are evil. He says, so then do not be foolish, but understand what God's will is for you in your life. The older I get, I realize that life is very, very short. And it's up to us to maximize every single day. If we're going to leave waves, if you will, if we're going to leave a legacy of some type for people to grow from, because we've paid the price to do the right thing every day. You live in a time that if you lift up your feet, the flow of the culture will end up taking you to a place that you may not really want to go. This applies all over the culture, whether it's the relationships, meaning that there are people in your life that if you don't take a stand and do the right thing consistently around them, then their mindsets are going to take you down a path that are going to be, let's just say, not so good for you in the long run. Because the old saying is birds of a feather tend to flock together. So if you and I allow the culture, if you and I allow our peers to just sweep us away and take us down paths that really aren't going to benefit us in the long term, because we've chosen not to take the lead in our own lives, it's going to impact us in a not very good way at all. So again, he says, don't be foolish, but understand what God's will is for your life. Now, you and I know what we should do, but we need to maybe stop playing games so much in lives, that maybe we need to face up to what you know God's will is in your life, and that takes time. That takes an investment of time. So what's the wise thing to do? Every day, you and I have to remind ourselves, or maybe even ask ourselves, what is the wise thing to do for us? George Foreman, the great boxer, he writes, a business friend came to me with an offer. He said this, George, you've helped other companies by advertising their products. Have you ever thought about having your own product? Later, he sent me a small slanted grill and asked me to try it out. I got busy with other things and forgot about it. And a couple months later, he called and he says, George, what do you think of the grill? Oh, the grill. Well, to be honest, I haven't really tried it yet. Let me get back to you on that. After hanging up, I almost made one of the worst financial decisions I could have ever made. I thought, I really don't have time to do this. Fortunately, Mary changed my mind. George, I've tried the grill and I like it a lot. The grease rolls right off and the food tastes really good. Are you serious? Yeah, she replied, I'll fix you a burger. After taking a bite, I said, yeah, it's really good and the grill is easy to clean up. I like this grill. I wasn't thinking about making any money on the deal. I just signed the contract so I could get 16 free grills for my homes and friends and family members. I never dreamed this opportunity could turn into a grilling empire. The point of the story is sometimes, I think a lot of times, every little step you take leads into another step. So if it leads to another step, then maybe we need to be careful what steps we take, because sometimes the wrong steps take us down a path that isn't really so good. The easiest person for you and I to deceive is the one in the mirror. Because sometimes you can tell yourself things, sometimes you can get yourself in trouble, sometimes we all know how to get ourselves in trouble by the wrong choices that we make. So in light of maybe some choices that you're being tempted to make, you need to ask yourself a couple of things. Actually, one big thing is, in light of my past, what's the wise thing to do? Think about that a minute. In the light of my past, what is the wise thing to do that will impact my future in a positive way? Your past is your past, but it still can influence where you go in the future. What's okay for me to do might not be okay for you to do. What's okay for you to do might not be okay for me to do because of our past experiences. And I could share some very personal examples, and I'm tempted to do that. There's some things that I can't be around that maybe you can be around because of my past. There's some things that don't bother me at all, but would really bother you because of your past. So maybe we need to be conscious of the people around us, because unless we get to know the people around us, we're not going to know what trips them up. So then we should be more conscious of the people around us so that we can help them and lift them up. So again, I ask the question for you and me too. What's the wise thing for you and I to do? Most people believe they can manage outcomes, or I can handle it, but that's really not the case. What you and I can only manage is what we think and what we do consistently, what we do on a daily basis, that will create a domino effect in our life that can change us and change our surroundings and change our culture in a way that maybe you haven't thought about before. I asked the question over and over today, is what is the wise thing for you to do in your life? So many people trade the results of using wisdom for a decision that they know is going to cause them trouble later. How many times haven't you done stuff without thinking things through enough, and then because you didn't think things through enough, you found yourself flat on the back in a situation that's now taking a long time to get out of because you chose not to think things through? It's always a bad idea, by the way, to trade what you want for something that won't even be here later. Again, I'll say it again. It's always a bad idea to trade what you want for something that won't even be here later. How many times haven't you seen fads come and go? I mean, you've all seen, if you're old enough, you've seen things, I think about the Cabbage Patch dolls and the Rubik's Cube and certain styles of cars and certainly certain styles of clothing. They come and go, but people get all whacked out because, they have to have the best and the most current thing, when in 5 years or 10 years, it's going to be outdated, and then you're going to have to, in order to stay in the culture, you have to buy new stuff again. So again, there's some things that really we do as in a culture that makes no sense at all. People with short-term thinking don't walk in wisdom. Again, people with short-term thinking don't walk in wisdom. They don't understand what's the wise thing to do. If you have a personal vision of your future, you can really, it helps you see where you're headed. How many times haven't you seen buildings going up and they're constructed all over the cities across the United States? But they don't just throw them up any old way. It starts with a blueprint. It starts with people putting their heads together and mapping out a plan to build the buildings. Well, if you and I think that we can get through life without designing our life or allow people into our lives that can help us design our lives, then we're really not going to go any place very, very fast. So making decisions based on the future many times is the wise thing to do. So in the light of my past experiences and my present circumstances, and maybe with my hopes and dreams kind of mixed into that, what's the wise thing for you to do? So I'm trying to paint you an image here that everything you do, everything you say, everything I do, everything I say impacts things that can happen down the road. Few people, relatively few people, plan to mess up their lives. Few people really get up in the morning trying to figure out how they can royally screw up. But if we don't run our lives proactively and having a game plan for our lives, then the net result is that you and I are going to have a life that is far less than what we expected. Wisdom is one of those dominoes that will impact you in a big way. Again, wisdom is one of those dominoes that will impact you in a big way. Without wisdom, the domino impact will impact your life in a negative way. That is, that if you choose not to adopt the habits that you need in your life, then things are going to happen by default. And sometimes those things that happen by default, in fact, I'd say most of the time, the things that happen by default are not the net result that you're looking for in your life, because things that happen by default are typically not a good thing. Over in Proverbs 19 in the Old Testament, it says, "Also it is not good for a person to be without knowledge, and he who makes haste with his feet makes mistakes." Another text says, "The plans of the diligent lead surely to advantage, but everyone who is hasty comes surely to poverty." Beware of the instant gratification or the once-in-a-lifetime deal. I can remember one time when my wife and I were in Florida. Before we had children, we were sold on this idea of going to see on a tour. And with that tour, you got certain things. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was a sales pitch about a timeshare. And I was gung-ho, man. I was ready to sign on the dotted line. It was my wife here, and I was here, and the salesperson was here, and I had the pen in hand. I was ready to sign it. And she's like, "No, we're not. This doesn't make sense for us." So I tried to sell her on the idea that this is the best thing for us, man. It was a great deal. I thought that we were going to be able to come down to Florida and just hang out. We'll pay the payments over time, and it just seemed to make sense. Well, long story short, she won. We didn't sign up for the timeshare. Looking back, I'm so glad that we didn't sign the timeshare. You know why? Because it would have been financially devastating to us over time and a complete waste of money. The point being is sometimes the emotion of the moment gets us to do stupid things that when we look back in time and with maybe a set of glasses with wisdom, at least a little bit, we can see that, man, I wish I shouldn't have done what I did, because it eventually will cost you a lot. So when in doubt, leave it out. Again, when in doubt, leave it out. What's possible motives that may be driving the decisions that you're trying to make? Are they greedy decisions? Are they unethical decisions? King Solomon, many thousands of years wrote or said, he said, "All the ways of a man are clean in his own sight, but the Lord God weighs the motives." He goes on to say, "Who can say, I've cleansed my heart, I am pure from my sin?" I think you and I need to consistently check our motives, because if our motives are not completely pure, then we need to really look harder in the mirror and think about, are we doing what we're trying to do for the sake of others or ourselves? What's that underlying why behind why we're doing what we're doing? So wisdom is one of those dominoes that can influence your life forever. I mean, in a big way. On March 3rd, 2015, Benjamin Netanyahu addressed some members of Congress, and he kind of made something very clear. He said this, quote, "And before the people of Israel entered the land of Israel, Moses gave us a command that has steeled his words, our resolve for thousands of years. I leave you with this message today. He said it in Hebrew, but the translation is, be strong and resolute. Neither fear nor dread them. He says, my friends, may Israel and America always stand together strong and resolute. May we neither fear nor dread the challenges ahead. May we face the future with confidence, strength, and hope. He said, may God bless the state of Israel, and may God bless the United States of America. You see, if you and I want to get anywhere in life, it has to be intentional. We have to align the dominoes. We have to align things in our life in a way that will make it more likely for us to reach a certain point in our lives. Now, there's other dominoes that can impact your life, not only wisdom, but strength. Yeah, we're talking about strength. I go back to what Benjamin Netanyahu said, be strong and resolute, neither fear nor dread them. So we see that over time, the temptation for us to give up and quit in the process of going where we're going, or in the journey, sometimes can be overwhelming, because sometimes the battle, the difficulty, the stress, the strain, the being tired in the journey gets so overwhelming that you just want to throw in the towel and quit. We see consistently through the Old Testament, and I'm talking dozens of times, when people just wanted to give up and quit and throw in the towel before they even reached their final destination. So the chief emotion sometimes in the middle of your journey and my journey is not belief, but maybe what our why is. What's the motivation behind what we've been trying to do versus what we really want to do. So strength is something that just doesn't happen. Strength has to be developed, and I'll be the first to tell you that I wish that I had certain genes that would not make it as difficult to build strength. And I found that strength only comes from difficulties and comes from stress and comes from pushing forward through things that maybe you didn't think that you could push through in your life. In Ephesians, St. Paul said this, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. In the power of his might. And then he goes on to list certain categories and certain criteria that we need to fill ourselves with and to carry ourselves with in order for us to increase the chances of us succeeding versus not succeeding. In fact, it talks about putting on God's armor, about the breastplate of righteousness and the shield of faith. And one part of it says, so use every piece of God's armor to resist the enemy whenever he attacks, and when it is all over, you'll be standing strong. That's a paraphrase of the text. So building strength is not something that just happens. It doesn't. Strength conditioning is hard work. In fact, I was at the gym the other day, and I was watching this particular guy do a bench press, and it was quite a bit of weight. And he was probably about 30 pounds heavier than me. And I don't know why I said it, but I was feeling pretty doubtful that day. I said, I don't know if I could ever achieve that. I don't think I could ever lift that much weight on a bench press. He said, man, it's all in your head. It's all how you think. It's all how you believe. So that reminded me, of course I knew that, but maybe I had to be reminded that day that if I change my thinking sometimes, the results in time, when I mix them with certain actions and consistent actions, then the domino effect makes sense, because then I'm changing not only the way I'm thinking, but what I'm doing, how I'm behaving, and the results then show accordingly. So I go back to what St. Paul said in the New Testament, that sometimes we just have to change the way not only we think, we behave, but our habits and what we allow that's closest to us. Because sometimes what and or who is closest to you impacts where you're going to end up down the road. Norman Vincent Peale said one time, you wouldn't play tennis in your bare feet. You wouldn't mountain climb in your pajamas. You wouldn't swim in your winter coat. So why go to battle without the proper attire? Think about that a minute. The important thing, I think, for you and I to remember, at least in this domino effect text here today, that everything you do, everything you think, every behavior you develop, every habit that you build into your life impacts more than just you. If young people would get that through their heads, that everything they do impacts more than just their lives, then maybe they would have and make decisions that would be a little smarter for themselves. I've seen many people, especially people that ignore the wisdom of people around them, that they don't think that what they do impacts next door. I have, years ago when I was like 21, 22 years old, we bought our first house. And we had a guy next door to us that moved in maybe 6 months after that, and he decided to start renovating his house. That's a long story behind that, but in the middle of the night, 2 and 3 a.m., he would be taking a sledgehammer, literally, no joke, a sledgehammer to the wall that separated our houses because he wanted to renovate the house. So if there was a wall separating our houses, then obviously what he was doing on his side impacted me on my side. Longer story short, everything you do on your side impacts somebody on the other side. So you and I need to be much more conscious about what we're doing consistently because it impacts more people than I think you can even imagine, and I can even imagine. So you and I have to be very intentional about everything we do because wisdom and strength are just two dominoes that can impact your life and my life in a big way. So be proactive. And remember that everything you say, everything you believe, every step you take, every decision you make impacts more people than you can possibly imagine because life is all about the domino effect. My name is John Carver, and I thank you for watching.